Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. I'm here on a special edition, I guess we could say, of the Richard Dolan Show because I have a guest. Those of you who followed me for a long time know I used to do have a lot of guests on, and haven't really wanted to do that too much lately, but every now and then I do. And this is a gentleman that I had on, I think about a year ago or more, when the Eric Davis notes on Thomas Wilson came out, and this is a gentleman under a pseudonym known as Mr. X. We did something like a 4 or 5 hour massive long interview. It's out there on my YouTube channel. You can listen to it. And Mr. X and I are friends. We've known each other now for a number of years. I consider him to be a very highly insightful, brilliant analyst, anonymous, but he's active in the UFO field nonetheless. And he's had a few things that he wanted to say to me about the Davis-Wilson controversy, particularly after I did a piece on Fade to Black with Jimmy Church recently. So, Mr. X, welcome back. Good to have you here.
I'm very glad to be here speaking with you, Richard.
Good. Well, why don't we just jump right in? So, I don't know if people know too much about you. I don't know how much they really need to know about you. I try to introduce you as best I could. You're a private individual. You want your anonymity intact, and so we will respect that, but you are very engaged in the UFO subject, among other things, and you have also been following the Davis-Wilson controversy from the beginning. So why don't you jump in with some of the things that you feel are important that need to be said at this particular time?
Well, for those individuals who have never heard of the Eric W. Davis notes, or also called the Admiral Wilson document, I think I need to give just a very brief summary of what it's about. Basically, Dr. Stephen Greer, that's well known for the Disclosure Project work he did, bringing together UFO witnesses for a meeting at the Press Club in D.C. And on April 9th of 1997, he went to the Pentagon with a team that included Edgar Mitchell, Commander Willard Miller, Sherry Adamak, that's Stephen Greer's assistant, and Stephen Lovkin. And they had a meeting with Admiral Wilson. And this meeting led Admiral Wilson to start looking for these carved out, waived, unacknowledged special access programs working on recovered extraterrestrial spacecraft to figure them out. And basically, he met a lot of resistance, but he got help, and he ended up finding these programs, and he was denied access. And then he basically was forced to drop the issue under threat from the leadership team of the senior review group of the Special Access Program Oversight Committee. And then he basically did what he was told, and he dropped it. And then years later, in 2002, these notes, I'm going to pull it up right now to get the exact date. The date on them is,
I think it's October 16th.
1602. I'm not sure if it was that exact date he met with Eric Davis, Dr. Eric W. Davis, but he met with him at the EG&G Special Projects Building in Las Vegas, and basically gave an account of his experiences. So that's basically what these notes are, and we're going to dive into some other material about the notes. And I would suggest if anyone is interested in these, Richard has written some very good articles, some very good summaries about these notes, and I would suggest people go there. Joe Murgia, his website, UFO Joe, has a lot of great material on there. He's done a lot of writing about these notes. There's many good sources for information about them.
That's exactly right.
So that's the basics.
Yeah, and just to emphasize with people, I think you did a nice overview of that, incidentally. But everything that you have recounted actually comes out of the notes that Eric Davis wrote in 2002 from his conversation with Thomas Wilson.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I guess it goes without saying that, and I don't know how much of this we want to go into here, but it might be useful just to mention to people these notes are still disputed by some individuals within the UFO community and who believe that they're either a hoax or fraudulent in one way or another. And one of the reasons I just went on to Jimmy Church's Fade to Black the other night was to speak to some of those claims that the documents were a hoax, a script of some sort, or some other bit of disinformation, and which I have never believed. I have got my own very strong reasons for this, which I've said many times. And so I went on there and did that. But there are people who dispute the authenticity of these notes. You and I do not dispute the authenticity of these notes. So I'm just going to hand it. Yeah, go on. I'm going to hand this back to you and let you run with where you want to go with this, Mr. Rex.
I was just going to say there's a mountain of evidence in support of these notes. But before we get into that, before we get into some of the really juicy evidence that really, in my opinion, cements the reality of these notes, I want to go through a couple little things real quick. First of all, one issue that has been brought up lately by certain parties is that a document called the NRO document, that Dr. Stephen Greer, it's an alleged security alert that was issued to parties around Area 51 back, I think, in 1991. There was going to be an event at the Little Ailey Inn in Rachel, Nevada, outside of Area 51 or the Nellis base, and this security alert leaked out. It got into Stephen Greer's hands, and he sent that as part of a document package. It was like an updated package from what he prepared for the Clinton administration, and he sent that to, or he had Willard Miller send that to Admiral Wilson before their meeting at the Pentagon. And this NRO document, what happened was it actually has a whole list of code names on the front of it. It mentions, just to read a few, Royal Ops, Cosmic Ops, MAJ, M-A-J Ops, Magi, M-A-J-I Ops, and then about 20 others underneath that. And apparently the story goes, according to Stephen Greer and Willard Miller, that Admiral Wilson recognized one of these code names and made inquiries and basically was denied access. And some of the best evidence for that is from Willard Miller, because Willard Miller has actually, kind of confirmed that, because at the end of the meeting, an aide of Admiral Wilson took Willard Miller to the side and basically told him MJ-12 was real. And I have the quote right in front of me.
Now, these are in the notes. This is right out of the notes that you're quoting.
Well, this is what I'm quoting right now. This quote is not in the Eric W. Davis notes.
Let me guess. This is an interview that Miller and Greer did, which is on YouTube.
Yes.
That's right, where they talk about this. All right, you go on then.
But before I read this, I just want to specify the NRO document is not mentioned in the actual Eric W. Davis notes. No one in the notes speaks about the NRO document, not Eric Davis, not Admiral Wilson, and not Willard Miller in the 2-page letter that's inserted in the notes. So this is just a little bit of background information on the NRO document. So Willard Miller made the following statement in an interview with Greer that's on YouTube. So this is about what happened at the end of the meeting with Admiral Wilson in the Pentagon in 1997. And here's the quote. Yes, it was also a little interesting aside. As I was leaving, the Admiral's aide turned to me and said, the subject of Majestic, MJ-12, came up, and there's been a lot of debate as to, whether that's real, whether it ever existed. And he said, we know it exists. We here at the Intelligence Directorate for the Joint Staff just don't have the need to know what they do. And I found that to be an interesting statement.
That's right. Now, Greer and Miller said this, I can't remember the year, but it was several years before these notes leaked out. The Davis notes leaked out.
Yes.
So they were just talking about it.
It was years before that.
I want to make sure people understand, too, the reason we're talking about this NRO document is because, all right, so Greer said that he used this document as one of the things to present to Wilson prior to their meeting, and it has been asserted that this NRO document is a hoax, is false. It's a fraudulent document. And I think we can make the person who's made this claim, of course, is John Greenwald of the Black Vault. And I've known John for 20 years now. And I tried explaining on Jimmy Church's show, I have no personal animosity to John whatsoever. I've known and liked him for a long, long time. I hope he understands that. But the point is, he made this claim that the NRO document was a hoax, in his opinion, and that therefore he considered that document to be foundational to everything else. If the document is false, then his reasoning was that Wilson could never possibly have been fooled by such an obvious hoax, and that therefore Wilson never went on his wild goose chase to look for the ET black budget programs, special access programs, and that therefore the whole thing is probably just one big fiction. So for him, it comes down to the NRO document being a likely hoax. And what I said recently, and I know what you have said to me privately, and which you'll probably say publicly, is that the NRO document's absolutely irrelevant to anything else that's followed. It's not even clearly that it was even used by Wilson. We actually don't know that it was used by Wilson. There's not any direct evidence. But there's a great deal of evidence that Wilson did go on his search for these programs, whatever he thought of that document Greer brought him. The last thing I just want to say here is, and then I want you to jump back in, please. On my website over at Richard Dolan Members, we have a forum with a lot of very smart people who actually have been following this controversy quite a bit, including the authenticity of that NRO document. And I mean, personally, I do not know where I stand on this, but I can absolutely say that there are intelligent and seemingly well-informed individuals who are doubtful of this argument that that NRO document's a hoax. I don't know that anyone's saying, it's absolutely legit, but I think that there are people who are wondering about the strength of the argument that it's a hoax. And there were reasons put forth why that is so, and I don't feel a need to go into that here. But I just thought I would put that out there, regardless of the truth or falsity of this document. I don't think it's germane to what happens after that. But the whole thing about it being a hoax may be true or it may not be true, and I don't feel like I'm in a position to say definitively one way or the other. I don't know what your feelings are about that, actually. We haven't talked about it. But I thank you for letting me do that little interruption or intermission, and I'd like you just to jump right back in where you'd like to go.
Okay, I was just going to say that I don't know if the document is a hoax or not. Talking about the NRO document, it may be legitimate, it might not be. It does not look, just reading it, it seems reasonable to me. But, even if it is some kind of hoax or some kind of made-up document, all that matters is that apparently Admiral Wilson recognized one of the code names, and he was able to use that to inquire about that program, and he got a denial when he tried to attempt to get access. Other than that, it's irrelevant to the Eric W. Davis notes. It's basically a separate issue. This is like a little thing that's on the side of the main issue. Like I've said before,
Agreed.
This document is not mentioned in the Eric W. Davis notes at all. Another point is, although Stephen Greer, and again, we need to give Stephen Greer credit, because if it was not for his meeting with Admiral Wilson would have never went on this search, found these programs. The 4 programs he finds in the Eric W. Davis notes. He describes the whole scenario, and then eventually told Eric Davis about it. So we need to thank Dr. Stephen Greer for briefing Admiral Wilson, and we need to give him a lot of credit for that. However, it was not this document that helped Admiral Wilson find the specific 4 programs that were basically sub-programs of official carved out, waived, unacknowledged special access programs. He found those by asking for assistance from other people in the Pentagon. For example, if you read the notes, I have a little list here. First, he asked General Marshall Ward, W-A-R-D, for information about them. And he also asked the former Secretary of Defense at the time in 1997, Bill Perry, for help. And what's interesting is he also asked Paul Kaminsky, who had been the former Undersecretary of Defense, not the current at the time, the former Undersecretary of Defense, which would have made him the former chairman of the leadership team of the Senior Review Group. Also, he asked General Mike Kostanek.
I just wanted to point out that Senior Review Group is very, very important. Like, it's the key oversight office for the special access programs that were guarding these ET related programs that Wilson was looking for. So you have to go through the Senior Review Group.
Well, the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, they both, and maybe intelligence agencies as well, they have special access program oversight committees. And we know a lot more about the one in the DOD than we do the Department of Energy.
Right.
But we do know it exists in the Department of Energy. But there's a whole hierarchy in the Special Access Program Oversight Committee. And again, I'm talking about how it was structured in 1997. It has changed slightly today. There's some of the exact terms used for these different teams. But back then, there was the General Special Access Program Oversight Committee that had a fairly large membership, but the overall Special Access Program Oversight Committee rarely, according to my understanding, what I've heard people say, it rarely got together frequently as one big group. But then there was the Senior Review Group of the Special Access Program Oversight Committee that met on a regular basis. But then there was the leadership team of the Senior Review Group of the Special Access Program Oversight Committee. And this leadership team, probably one of the most important people in it, is the Director of Special Programs, because the Director of Special Programs is also the director of the Special Access Program Coordination Office. So every year, every special access program, whether it's a WAVE program, a carved out program, they all have to give updates, update their information in the official index. Mm-hmm. So they go through this man. And what's so important here is that Admiral Wilson did not get the information to find these 4 programs he eventually located from the NRO document. No, he got the information from the people who would know. Bill Perry, Paul Kaminsky, who would have been the chairman of the leadership team of the Senior Review Group, and Michael Kostanek, who was the former director of special programs. And one other little thing before we move on, because I know we have a lot to cover and I really want to get through some of this, is one mistake I hear is that some of the names don't make sense in the document. Like when it says Paul Kaminsky was this or Mike Kostanek was that, they look up the year and it's not a match. The reason is, in the notes, either Admiral Wilson or Eric Davis did not mention the names of the individuals that were on the leadership team of the Senior Review Group that threatened Admiral Wilson, that denied him access and told him to drop the issue or he would risk losing stars, he would risk losing his promotion to director of the DIA, and he would risk his retirement. And we know who was probably on this group, and I'll mention them really quick. Just as an example, we know that at that time, Noel Longmire Jr. was actually serving as both the acting Undersecretary of Defense and Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. And that could have made him the chairman of the leadership team of the Senior Review Group. However, since he was just the acting Undersecretary, his denial, basically like many of the other denials we have gotten from all these people, like Billy Cox, who has contacted some different individuals involved, they all seem to have, they don't all use this term, but they all seem to have a foggy memory. They all seem to not recall, being involved. So we really don't know if their stories are true or not. But he's one of the individuals that could have been on that team. What we do know for a fact was that Major General William F. Moore was actually the director of special programs at the time, which would have made him the co-chairman of the leadership team of the senior review group. We, from all the research I've done, it looks like a Mr. Dick Williams, who is a longtime DOD official that spent many years in the Pentagon, would have been the executive secretary of the leadership team. And just in case, Longmire Jr., and it could be, because he was only the acting undersecretary, and it's usually the undersecretary of defense that serves that role as chairman. If he was not on the team that threatened Admiral, very possible he could be very well telling the truth, then they could have brought in someone else to play that role. I mean, for example,
I just want to jump in. So your hypothesis, or your, let's say,
yes,
possible speculation is that Noah Longmire Jr. might have been one of the people who have threatened Wilson,
yes,
as well as the last two individuals that you just mentioned. It could be any one or any combination of those three.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you read the notes, I think he specifies that he met with the senior review group, but it was the chairman specifically that threatened him. And we don't know who was playing the role of chairman because he wouldn't give the names in the notes. We just know who would most likely have been on the leadership team of the senior review group, because we know for a fact, for example, who was chairman, who was director of special programs, and I'm thinking from what I have, the documents I have read, that Mr. Dick Williams, and these are documents available online for anybody, that probably Mr. Dick Williams was executive secretary.
Yeah.
But it's possible, what I was going to say is they could have brought in for that meeting with Admiral Wilson when he was demanding access. They could have brought in, now these two individuals, one was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and then he left, and the other one obtained the position immediately afterwards. So it could have been John P. White, or it could have been John Hamre, Hamre. And John P. White has passed away, but John, Hamre, is alive. So we don't know who exactly threatened him. We don't know.
Yeah, again, I just let me this, for anyone who's got a copy of the Davis notes, it's actually on page 14. It's near the end, where Wilson is telling Davis. Davis is like, "Oh, so you nearly got busted." You know, this is when Wilson's complaining to the senior review group about his failure to get access to the ET related UFO program. And Wilson says, yes, close to that. And he said, senior review group chairman said, if I didn't follow their suggestion, and the suggestion was that he drop the entire matter, that I would not see director DIA promotion, get early retirement, lose 1 or 2 stars along the way. These are Davis's notes from what Wilson said. Really incredibly angry, upset over this, livid. Why such a big deal over this considering the position of trust I have in the Pentagon? I do have relevant regulatory/statutory authority over their program. That's my position. So here's Wilson talking about being threatened by the senior review group chairman, but you are right, he does not give the name of that individual. And so there's, and you know, it makes sense. Why would Wilson tell Davis every single detail? You know, it's not as if, he owes him every, he agreed to meet with Davis. And if we read the notes, he agreed to meet with Davis on the recommendation of a gentleman named Okey Shannon, who is actually a very perfect go-between. Shannon's a Navy man who knew Wilson very well and also knew this NIDS group. He knew like the Davis Putoff, Kid Green group, Edgar Mitchell, and John Alexander. So he was actually a pretty good go-between. But anyway, I'm just pointing this out because, this was a very big issue. Like Wilson was threatened. We don't know who threatened him. And the reason is that Wilson didn't necessarily know Davis well enough to give him all of that information. Don't you think that's likely?
Well, I think that either Admiral Wilson did not give the names of the individuals that actually threatened him and that he met with. And I'm assuming they were all together in a conference together, him and the leadership team of the senior review group.
Mm-hmm.
Or he may have given the names to Eric Davis but asked Eric Davis not to share them, because that would be very sensitive information.
That's a very good
information.
Yeah, very good point.
Because he wouldn't want people, like he knew Eric Davis was probably most likely going to share this with Putoff, because he mentioned Putoff, and asked him if he would be willing to speak with Hal Putoff or Kit Green in these notes. So he knew probably he would share this information with them, and he may not have wanted Putoff or Kit Green to know the names of the individuals in the leadership team of the senior review group or the individual that threatened him.
Mm-hmm.
The main reason I brought this up is just because some people try to say that there's errors in this document. Like, for example, on page 14 near the end, it says Mike K., that's Michael Kostanek, who was actually the former Director of Special Programs, was replaced by Brigadier General Michael Ward. That's not correct, because Michael K. was actually replaced by Major General William F. Moore, who was the Director of Special Programs, while Admiral Wilson was searching for the Special Access Programs.
It could be that Wilson just got it wrong. It's 5 years later. Why would Wilson remember every single bureaucratic transformation that took place?
He would have remembered the names of the individuals that he was in that meeting with. And because
but this
William
is a
F.
different
Moore,
issue. This isn't about the meeting. He's talking about Kostanek being replaced by another man that he knew, but he might have just gotten the. Why would it be difficult to think that he just misremembered it?
Well, I think that he would have been aware of the transition, the correct transition here, from one to the other. But that's just my opinion, and I think that Admiral Wilson intentionally did not give these names because he did not want to reveal who it was that was in that meeting. That's my opinion.
I do see your point there.
I cannot prove that.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring that up.
Right.
But basically what I was wanting to get at as well is that another thing that some people say about the NRO document, which we don't know absolutely if the entire document is legitimate or not, but a couple of the first code names on it, or program names, is MAJ, MAJ, or Magi. And Jimmy Church found that to be surprising, because he did not, he seemed to be skeptical that MJ-12 ever existed. He almost sounded like he did not believe, MJ-12 or a program like that was real. However, there's a lot of evidence, and we're not going to go through all of it. I'm just going to run through a couple things real quick. First of all, there's the whole story of the Canadian government official Wilbert Smith, who actually wrote up a document called Project Magnet. And he had sources such as Robert Sarbacher, who was a renowned, extremely credible scientist who was technically working as what's called a $1-a-year man, because he had his own business and he had to, spend a lot of time on that. But he was a consultant with Dr. Eric Walker, who had been the director or president of the Research and Development Board at the Pentagon. And basically, Wilbert Smith learned that Dr. Vannevar Bush, was in charge of a UFO program. And there's a lot of information right there.
This
in
is
all of
way
that.
back in the 1950s. That's right.
Yep. That basically gives a lot of credibility to the idea that there was a UFO program. And none of these documents, in regards to Wilbert Smith, do we get a lot of details about MJ-12. But just as an example, researchers such as, I believe, Stanton Friedman and a couple others contacted Dr. Eric Walker and asked him about MJ-12. And he made one statement like, oh, I've known about them for 40 years, I believe he said. And he answered some other questions evasively about MJ-12, but he did not deny it. And Dr. Eric Walker, one thing a lot of people don't know about him is he was the original manager of the Manhattan Project. And he was the individual that had to brief Truman on its existence. So he was not only a renowned scientist, but he was deep into, the blackest of the black programs at the time. So another
Walker, I'll just say Walker was interviewed by the late researcher William Steinman about that. Friedman didn't talk to him, but Steinman was the one who really got some amazing amount of information out of Walker. And what you say is exactly right. Walker responded explicitly to Steinman about MJ-12 and said, yes, I've known about that for 40 years. This is in 1987, so that would take you back to the late 1940s.
And to get to the next point about Majestic, although I don't want to get into all the details of Bob Lazar's story because we don't have time for that. What's interesting about Bob Lazar is allegedly he worked at a facility near Area 51 called S4, and he claimed, and I believe he may have shown a photograph of his badge or a recreation of his badge, and he claimed it had MAJ on it for Majestic, and that his supervisor also had a badge that had MAJ for Majestic. And when he was first brought into the program, they made him read a stack of documents that were very similar to what Linda Moulton Howe read when she was exposed to, I think, the Aquarius documents, or what became known as the Aquarius documents, by Richard Doty.
Yeah.
And,
well, there's a lot. All right, so getting into a lot of area where, the claims are very wide that this is all disinformation and hoaxed documents. Linda was shown that back in 1983 by Richard Doty. That is true. Yeah. And we do know that there was an effort at disinformation targeted against Linda at that time. So let's just keep all of that in mind. But the Lazar thing that's true. But Lazar did have that statement about the Madge part on his badge. And that's 1989. 1988, 89. So around the same time period as this supposed NRO document.
So the only thing I'm trying to draw from that is the possibility that there was a MAJ program, a Majestic program operating at either Area 51 or the S4 facility. So
like you, I don't have a problem believing that. I do not have a problem believing that a Madge program could have existed. I think I agree that it's not outrageous to say that could be there, and it could be on some, those letters could be on some document. Jimmy Church felt that there was just such a long string of these documents, of these code names, that it just seemed like over the top, not credible to him. But I don't know what the protocols are with some of these, in some of these areas, whether that's true or not true. There are declassified documents that do have many, that'll have many code names on them, and also many departments that documents are to be distributed to. It doesn't strike me as impossible, but again, I'm not comfortable arguing in that realm with some of these other people.
Well, there's only 4 at the very top of this list, which are really interesting. I mean, Royal Ops, I don't know what that is. That doesn't sound UFO related. But there's Cosmic Ops, Madge Ops, and Magi Ops. And then there's other names on here that could very well be just ordinary intelligence terms or ordinary teams that do security for conventional programs at Area 51. I mean, the rest of this probably has nothing to do with UFO programs. It's just those top ones that are really, really interesting. I don't know for a fact, maybe one of these lower teams, that's at the bottom of this list could be something UFO related. It's possible. I mean, there's things on there I've never heard of before. Aquatech, SOG, Sea Spray, SOG. I don't know what those are. I just know some of these, like ComSec, ELINT, Human Ops. Some of these, you can look up these terms. They're just common intelligence terms. So there's not like a huge long list of UFO stuff here. There's just a few. But what I was going to say for Jimmy Church or anyone else that might be listening if they're interested in evidence for MJ12, I would say that Grant Cameron, he has an article called "Was There a UFO Control Group?" And you can search for it. You can do a Google search. It's at whitehouseuFO.blogspot.com. It's a great article called "Was There a UFO Control Group?"
Good.
And he brings up about a dozen points of evidence that there was a UFO control group, and some individuals, even like General Doolittle, although they did not admit to knowing a lot of details, they said it was either familiar to them or they had heard about it. But none of them, actually spilled the beans on everything, but they at least admitted that they had heard of it before. So there's evidence for MJ12. And I just wanted to say that the NRO document, again, we don't know if it's legitimate or not, but it doesn't matter because it's not central to the Wilson document at all. It's not foundational, and I just wanted to get that point across.
Very good.
To move on.
Yeah, let's
to
move on
from there to the actual document itself. One interesting point that I think really provides evidence that this whole scenario in the document took place is that Eric Davis actually knew Okey Shannon, and he knew him from the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group. Okey Shannon was a Navy officer that, if you read the document, he convinced Admiral Wilson on the phone. He talked to him for a couple hours to convince him to speak to Eric Davis. And so he basically helped set up the meeting. What's really neat is that Grant Cameron, I have a quote here from him about how he received from Eric Davis 20 years ago. Eric Davis gave him Okey Shannon's notes that Okey Shannon took while attending the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group meetings in the 1980s. That was a series of meetings where a bunch of UFO experts, remote viewing experts, and others got together to try to peel back the so-called layers of the onion to try to find out the truth about the UFO subject and related issues.
We should mention this was formed by John Alexander. Many people know who John Alexander is, who is also one of the group of the NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, people around Robert Bigelow. John Alexander, of course, knew Eric Davis very, very well, knew Hal Puthoff very, very well, Kit Green, Robert Bigelow, all of Edgar Mitchell. They all were in the same, they're having the same conversations with each other. So yes, through Alexander's Advanced Theoretical Physics Group, that's how is Okey or Oak? I actually never knew how to pronounce the name. You say Okey Shannon. That's how those two had that connection, and I'm sure there are probably other connections as well. But that's a very important link, is having that name in there. It's when, in fact, Grant told me as soon as he saw Okey Shannon's name on page one of those notes, when he looked at this for the first time, he said to me anyway, he said, I knew this was almost certainly legit. Like, that name just doesn't come out of nowhere. So that was a very strong support for Grant.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the key aspects of the notes that basically woke Grant Cameron up to the fact that it was actually legitimate. I'm going to read this quote from Grant Cameron real quick, just part of it. Quote, 20 years ago, Eric Davis gave me a set of notes from the UFO working group, 27 pages. So he gives me these documents and he says, they're Okey Shannon's notes and you can't release them until Okey passes away. So I said, okay, fine. So I've held these documents for 20 years, and they're handwritten documents, and they're inside the UFO working group that John Alexander put out. And Kit Green was at the first meeting. Hal Puthoff was there. Ron Blackburn was there. And all these guys are top secret clearances. So that's basically the quote.
Yep.
And one other thing interesting, if you check out John Alexander's book, I forgot the title of it, he actually has a list of people that either contributed to or participated in the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group meetings at the facility in, I think, McLean, Virginia.
That's right.
BDM Corporation. And he lists both Eric Davis and Okey Shannon on that list. So the whole point to that is that Okey Shannon and Eric Davis knew each other. And what's also interesting, if you combine that to a quote from Okey Shannon, if Okey Shannon's listening and I'm butchering his name, I sincerely apologize from the bottom of my heart. So I apologize. So Okey Shannon, he made this statement. I believe it was to Billy Cox. I'm not exactly sure. But he made this statement. It's available online. I don't know the provenance of that purported document. I don't know whether it's real or not real.
You're talking about
Shannon
Davis's
said.
notes here? We're talking about...
About the EWD notes.
Yeah, right.
Let's just leave it at the fact that I do know both of these gentlemen. Tom Wilson is an honorable man, and if this has embarrassed Tom Wilson, I am really sorry. So he knows both of these individuals, and so it really puts this document into context.
Didn't Wilson at first deny that he even knew Okey Shannon?
I believe he has.
Or he was
very
vague?
At first, I think he was very vague. He may have said something similar to, well, I've ran into a lot of people and I may vaguely know him.
Right.
Something to that effect. I don't think he flat out denied knowing him. I would have to go back through all of his quotes again. But basically...
But here Shannon is making it clear when he says Tom Wilson is an honorable man. That certainly implies a strong familiarity, seems to me.
Exactly, it does. It's not like, well, I might have met him 20 years ago and shook hands with him at an event somewhere. No,
right.
This statement strongly implies that he had some type of friendship with him.
Indeed.
Or at least knew him well enough to have a good estimate of his character. He had more than a passing understanding of this man. To call him honorable and to actually apologize if it had embarrassed him, that means he really knew him pretty decently. So basically, to move on from there, there's another piece. There's so much evidence for this document that it's legitimate, that Eric W. Davis actually wrote it, that it is an accurate, real account of the meeting between Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson. And this is a piece of evidence that's really in your face. And all you have to do is look at the alien autopsy email chain document that leaked out at approximately the same time as the Eric W. Davis notes. And this alien autopsy email chain document is a series of email exchanges between members of NIDS, such as Kit Green, Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, a couple others. And what's so interesting about this is Eric Davis actually admitted officially, and you can read this quote online on the Engaging the Phenomenon Twitter account. And I'm going to read this quote real fast. This is from Eric Davis himself. I saw it yesterday, leaked alien autopsy Kit Green NIDS/doc. It is not an electronic document. It is a scanned photocopy of a printed document, and we don't know who got a hold of it because it's almost 20 years old. I have no further comment. So he admits it's real. So if he admits that document is real, if you compare the style...
No, wait, he's talking about the alien autopsy email, or is he talking about
He's talking about the alien autopsy email.
Right, that's what I thought.
Chain document.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in the alien autopsy email chain document, if you look at his style of handwriting, he utilizes slashes. He utilizes commas.
Not handwriting, but his typing, his method of writing.
His writing style, I should say, not handwriting, but his writing style. He utilizes, or his punctuation style, he utilizes commas, dashes, lists, brackets. He uses a ton of punctuation.
He loves his parentheses. He's really into parentheses. They're all over the place. And you see that in the alien autopsy email thread, which you're referencing. That's from 2001. And so just a year and a half later, here's the EWD notes that he wrote in October of 2002. And once again, parentheses are everywhere, slashes, and all of that. You're exactly right. Like it's the same style of writing.
And I'm sure, beyond any doubt, if you got a linguistic expert and compared the EWD notes to his text in this alien autopsy, email chain document and perhaps other documents that are online that he has written, because he wrote a number of papers for NIDS. He has written, academic papers about warp drive physics, about 0-point energy. There's a bunch of interesting papers online that you can find about all kinds of science topics, because he's a trained scientist and he has done a lot of fantastic work.
I think the best ones you'd want that would be the more informal documents, not the formal published papers, because they're going to have a certain format to them. But these notes and the emails, like that's more of his natural style, I would say.
Well, I would say this is the thing. This informal style, that's something you and me can pick up instantly. Mm-hmm. A trained linguist can look at the actual format of the language he uses, like the patterns of words,
exactly.
The structure of his sentences.
Absolutely.
They can do a deep analysis, and they can tell if a certain person, if they have one document someone has written, and the more documents, the more data they can draw upon, they can tell if a certain document is written by someone. And
Agreed.
I'm sure that could be performed, and it would be absolutely conclusive.
Honestly, though,
Davis wrote.
I think ordinary, normal, intelligent people can look at the alien autopsy email thread, and they can look at what Davis wrote in that thread. That's publicly available. And then they can look at the EWD notes, the Davis notes. And I don't think it's that difficult for most people to say, oh, yeah, this seems like the same guy. Like, I think most individuals would be able to see that we're talking, there's a tremendous similarity. It's not that difficult to see.
Oh, yeah. I totally agree.
Right.
The writing style is extremely similar, with the same punctuation, the same parentheses, the same brackets. It's the slashes. But what I'm trying to say is, if someone had the money to hire a linguistic expert, they could take it to the next level and get this verified to the point it would hold up in a court of law. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it
for
would
sure.
be, that's how confident I am.
The only reason we're even bringing this up is because Davis can't admit that he wrote the note. He's come so close, but he can't state it explicitly, because that no one wants to be the owner of this document. Davis, Puthoff, particularly, they're both very afraid of this being legitimized, because it reflects poorly on them, because they were unable, they had a hand, particularly Davis, but also Puthoff, also Green, undoubtedly. They were all involved in this, to arrange for this meeting and to put this information down that was supposed to be secret and then leaked out. And that reflects badly on them. They all still have security clearances, and they do not want this to besmirch their reputation within the classified world. So they can't. So what we're doing here is we're looking for evidence that, yes, obviously Davis wrote these notes. And that's what you're doing here with this linguistic analysis. And that's why we're talking about Okey Shannon. In other words, we're in this playing this game of seeing how do we authenticate these notes. Because if these notes are authenticated, then that's incredibly important, because I just want people to realize they may be listening to this conversation. If this is the first time someone's listening, they're like, who gives it? Who cares about these notes? The reason these notes are important is because in them, Wilson is telling Davis how 5 years earlier, he, as vice chair of intelligence, vice deputy of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was denied access by a private contractor to a reverse engineering program dealing with UFOs. Like, that's important. And so to have that authenticated is obviously significant, and this is why everyone's running away from the document, because they don't want to be associated, but why many of us are intent on authenticating it. And for the record... go on. Yeah.
I was going to say the document is more important than anyone realizes, because it's not only the amazing story it tells, because if you read the document, he was the J2. He was the deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Yeah.
And he was an individual that had to brief the Joint Chiefs of Staff on a regular basis, maybe daily, on every intelligence matter imaginable from around the world. And so this was a very important guy that had to alert these senior top military leaders about the threats to the United States of America. And then he realizes, hey, from Stephen Greer and other sources, hey, there really are UFOs. There's extraterrestrials in physical craft, not a million light years away in another galaxy, in our skies, and they have technology beyond anything we have. Maybe these people I brief every day need to know about this threat. Maybe a species with technology 1,000 years more advanced than China or Russia, maybe they need to be looked at. Maybe the Joint Chiefs of Staff would like to know about them. And so he started searching for these programs, and not only did he discover them, he discovered that they were hiding out behind other programs. They were basically hiding out kind of like a sub-programs behind official, carved, waved out, unacknowledged special access programs. And it seems like from reading this notes, from what I gather, they were not listed in the official database in the Pentagon.
They were
in the Office of the
They were buried within programs that were already buried.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, there's a database, an index that's supposed to list every single program, wave, carved out everything, all the different kinds of programs and all their sub-programs. Is supposed to be honest information because it's only made for the people in the Special Access Program Oversight Committee. And probably most of the time, only senior review group members get to look at all of it. But still, it's supposed to be an honest, accurate index. And when he was looking through it, it did not say, UFO reverse engineering program. No, it had other names, but the budgetary figures were off. And the individuals such as William Perry and former members of the previous senior review group, they were the ones that helped him say, hey, look, this one has a UFO program behind it, and he was able to go look for these programs. But what's so important is he found the programs, and he realized that they're being managed by these private aerospace corporations, and that they basically are managing these programs with no accountability, and they basically can tell the senior review group of the Special Access Program Oversight Committee how high to jump. And they do their bidding, whatever they want. Because when he exposed them to the senior review group, they didn't give him an award. They did not thank him. They did not say, okay, will you help us lead this investigation into them? No, he was threatened.
Exactly.
He was threatened. And that's what's so significant. It shows the extreme power of these groups controlling the UFO cover-up. But what you were saying a minute ago, about Eric Davis not being able to admit to the Eric W. Davis notes being real. Here's his quote from the basement office with Stephen Greenstreet. This is just one quote from Eric Davis. Quote, they're purportedly classified information. I can't. I'm not at liberty to confirm or verify any aspect of those notes. When you have security clearances, that's something you don't want to violate, because the Department of Justice under the Obama administration and its continued under the Trump administration policies is they will vigorously prosecute anybody with security clearances who will go out of their way to discuss any classified information that got leaked or released into the public illegally, or through other means. So that's one quote from him. There's another quote he gave to UFO Joe Murgia, and this is from Eric Davis. It's on Joe Murgia's website. Quote, that per Tim McMillan's Twitter post, per the leak from Ed Mitchell's estate of the so-called Wilson notes, I did not have a lawyer, nor did I consult one. I consulted my supervisor and a federal law enforcement national security professional who happens to have a law degree but doesn't practice law on the perils of publicly commenting on documents allegedly containing classified info while one has active clearances. So he is trying to protect his clearances. He has a job at Aerospace Corporation now. He wants to protect his job. He has a family. He doesn't want to lose the income that allows him to provide for them. Also, he has built up a network of connections his entire career with Putoff, Kit Green, and probably dozens of other people. And he doesn't probably want to be the odd man out if he lost his clearance. He might be worried they might not talk to him again, or maybe not at the level they currently do.
That's
so it's understandable why he would not want to lose his clearance. But I will also say that if these notes were fiction, if he never met with Admiral Wilson, then he would know that, because that's his life. Such an event would have been a highlight of his life. It would have been a high moment, and he would remember it. And if these notes were fiction, if they were false, if the meeting never happened, I am beyond certain he would, even if he didn't want to talk about the details of the notes, okay? If it was fiction, I could understand maybe he wouldn't want to talk about the crash recovery stuff, although he has talked about crash recoveries of UFOs in other interviews before the notes leaked out. But let's just say, hypothetically, he didn't want to talk about crash recovery stuff or special access programs. He could say, if the notes were fake, he could just simply say, I never met with Thomas Wilson. The notes are fake because the meeting never happened, and that's all I'm going to say. But
yes,
he
absolutely.
does not say that. He gives these convoluted answers, which the only reason he would give these is to make people think that it really did happen. That's why. And I know that there are individuals that say, well, you're trying to turn a no comment into a yes, and that only happens in ufology. Well, here's the thing. You can look at reality, and in reality, he's a no-nonsense, no BS type of guy. And if that meeting never happened, he would say so. He could say it never happened. Also, if this had never happened, at least one of his close associates could say that the meeting never happened. Putoff has never said the meeting never happened.
That's right.
None of these close. Kit Green has never said that.
Yeah, in other words, there's nothing preventing any of these people from issuing a denial. All right. I mean, as you know, I was on with Jimmy Church the other night, and I just said, hey, look, if you were in the classified world and I wanted to accuse you of sending weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein in 2001, are you gonna give me a no publicly, or are you going to issue this convoluted no comment? Like, I mean, if he didn't do it, he's just going to say, no, that's ridiculous. Of course I didn't give Saddam Hussein weapons of mass destruction, rather than say, well, I'm not able to comment on that. Like, that's obviously would be a confirmation. So you're totally right. Like, there's nothing stopping these people from issuing a denial if they could do so.
I tell you what was the most amazing no comment that I have heard so far. When you had the online virtual UFO conference you held, and you asked Lou Elizondo about this, it was so interesting because he would not comment directly on the notes. However, he started saying how Eric Davis and Hal Putoff were national treasures.
Yes,
and he began praising Eric Davis. And he went on to say that he's someone he feels is incapable of saying a lie. And then the audio messed up, and he wanted to repeat the whole thing. So he said it again. So there's no way that's anything else but an effort to try to convey the fact these notes are real. He can't say, because of his clearances, that the Admiral Wilson document is legitimate, but he is going out of his way to try to express that reality without violating his clearances. And anyone who cannot see that is blind. They literally have scales on their eyes. They don't have common sense. And I just wanted to point that out because that's the most amazing no comment we've received so far. And we know Lou Elizondo worked with Eric Davis. He worked with Putoff.
Absolutely. So
he is someone that would know whether or not that actually happened. You know, and someone else, go ahead.
No, I'm not trying to cut you off. I just wanted to remind you and our listeners, we've been going, you and I, for about an hour, and we'll go as long as we need to. But I do want to keep things moving along so that we get to all of the points that you would like to discuss. And by the way, before we're done with this, I want to point out to people that you, and I've got this linked here, I'll have this link below, but you wrote an extended analysis of Dr. Eric Davis. Do you want to talk about that now, or do you want to wait on that?
I'll wait on that because I really want to zip through some of this, because some of this I can go through it real quick.
Let's do it.
Some points I would like to make.
Let's keep going.
Well, George Knapp, who was very close to NIDS, that's National Institute for Discovery Science, he actually issued a long statement, not only that he simply believes the notes are authentic, but he also brings up the obvious. There's no way that Eric Davis would have passed along a fake document to his closest associates and Robert Bigelow. This was a group of serious researchers that were being held accountable by Robert Bigelow, even though Davis was not technically working for Bigelow at the time. I'm sure they were all still communicating with each other. They were still all close, and he would have not have, tried to play a hoax on his closest friends and colleagues and his future employer, Hal Puthoff. That is just absurd. Also, I just want to point out that the highly respected journalist and author, I really want to plug his book, In Plain Sight, Ross Coulthart. He's an Australian journalist, and he also produced an amazing documentary that's available online. I encourage everyone to go watch it. He has stated that the high-level contacts he has made, who would be in a position to know, they've confirmed the reality of the Eric W. Davis notes as well. And so he's someone else that has been doing fantastic work, and he's basically received confirmations from different people. He has not revealed who they are, but I trust him. He's a mainstream journalist.
Is it fair to say that the individuals who confirmed that to him do not want their identities out there? Is that fair to say?
Probably so, because he has mentioned during his interviews, that he has, I think at one point he said like 4 different major witnesses that he has that confirm, these crash recoveries and reverse engineering programs. He's talked about one publicly in Nat Kobitz. I'm not saying he knew anything about the Eric Davis document. I tremendously doubt Nat Kobitz did, but that's just one name I remember.
Kobitz just recently passed away.
Yeah, he recently passed away. He claimed that he was aware of a program, and he saw a couple interesting things.
Yeah.
But to move on, I was just going to say that also, this is something I almost forgot, but I really want to mention this. Hal Puthoff, during a presentation he was giving at the end when there was a question and answer session, he slipped up because he was exhausted. He was tired. It was a long talk he gave. And he admitted that Eric Davis met with Admiral Wilson. To be fair, in communication with people afterwards, he tried to say he was only repeating the question that was asked. But if you listen to it, that's not what it sounds like at all.
I will agree with you. I asked Hal Puthoff this myself, and that is what he told me as well. He's like, well, I was just trying to repeat the question. But I actually agree with you because the audio does exist, and all you have to do is listen.
Well,
it did sound to me that he was acknowledging it. I agree. It sounded like he was. He will not acknowledge that. He will not state that to this day. So just to be fair to Hal Puthoff. But
yes, that's true.
I agree with you, but he has said what he has said.
Well, the question that was asked of him was this, quote, Richard Dolan calls the Wilson documents the Wilson document leak, the leak of the century. Can I get a comment on the Wilson documents? And now Hal Puthoff answering, this is a question about the Wilson documents that apparently got leaked on the internet. Admiral Wilson, who was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff interviewed by my senior scientist colleague, Eric Davis, since it discusses potentially ongoing programs, I have no comment. Now, the key sentence he said was, Admiral Wilson, who was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, interviewed by my senior scientist colleague, Eric Davis. So that seems like a blatant admission, not intentional admission, because he was exhausted, and I think he just let the truth out.
I agree. I agree.
Um,
So, but
and
he's got to cover himself as best he can, and I think that's just all he's trying to do.
and I also just want to say too, another issue is the chain of custody. Back when this document first leaked, many people online, I don't want to say many people, certain parties were trying to find the full chain of custody. A few people tried to claim there was a problem with the chain of custody, but there is no problem at all. The chain of custody is known. We know Davis gave it to trusted people at NIDS, including Edgar Mitchell.
Exactly.
Then a family friend of Edgar Mitchell who wishes to remain anonymous, but we know who he is.
That's right.
James Wrigley knows him. Other parties know who he is. He just wishes to keep his name offline. He doesn't want, the attention at all. He just has no desire for it. He rescued the EWD notes from being destroyed, along with a bunch of other papers. My understanding is it was boxes of papers, about, most of them just mundane papers from his office. But he rescued, basically a huge amount of documentation that would have otherwise just been thrown into a dumpster. And then this individual gave it, he let James Rigney search through these boxes. James Rigney recognized the significance of this document. Then later on, he showed it to Grant Cameron and then gave him a copy. And then Grant Cameron distributed it to some friends of his, and one of them, and Grant Cameron thinks he knows which individual did this, posted it online, and the rest is history. So the chain of custody is known. There's no doubt about it. And people try to bring up little issues about why won't the individual, that rescued it come forward? Well, he's just not interested in being part of the UFO scene, and I can't blame him. If you look at all the hostility out there and all the infighting in the UFO community, we're our own worst enemy most of the time. The government sometimes probably doesn't have to do much. They're probably laughing at us. They probably look at Twitter and they're like, hey, they're fighting so much, they're never going to get disclosure.
We eat our own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he just doesn't want to be part of that, and I understand it. One of the next, and this is really cool, you were like this, and a lot of people already know about this, but it needs to be mentioned. So Edgar Mitchell got this document, and Edgar Mitchell has made many statements over the years and interviews and videos and articles about the whole Admiral Wilson affair.
That's
and
right.
in some of them, he didn't call him Wilson. He just went by the Admiral. But what's interesting, in H Plus magazine, he made a very, very important quote, which is critical to the reality of the Admiral Wilson document. He states, subsequently, another contact of mine, who must also remain nameless because he's on classified programs, encountered the Admiral in Las Vegas, where he had been looking for and trying to get into the so-called strategic access program around the UFO incident and had been denied. So Edgar Mitchell had a friend that met the Admiral in Las Vegas. That's the same scenario as in the EWD document.
Exactly.
So that confirms it. It happened. And I want to state something else. When Edgar Mitchell received this document, I'm sure he read it and his eyes opened wide, and he would have had 100 questions. And I am sure that either they were there, either Eric Davis delivered it in person and he was able to ask him questions, or he made a phone call to ask Eric W. Davis questions. Mm-hmm. And so he would have actually got confirmation of this document from Eric Davis himself. There's no doubt about that.
Of course.
Edgar Mitchell was not a stupid man.
Absolutely.
And the idea that this was a hoax document, that it was given to the aging, given to this, and I don't think anybody has used this word against him, but it's been implied, gullible Edgar Mitchell, as some kind of trick is nonsense, because he would have called the source, of the document, Eric Davis, and if he had not admitted to it, he wouldn't have kept it in his files. He would have balled it up and threw it in the trash. But he kept it because it was important.
Exactly.
And I'm not even going to go through all the different arguments against this document because they're all insane. You know, there's some stupid ones. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to mention a couple. You know, there's a stupid idea of it being a movie script, but it doesn't read like a movie script. It isn't written like a movie script. The formatting is nothing like a movie script, and it uses real names instead of fictional characters. It's just insane. You know, there's another crazy theory that, you see, Davis was actually he lost his job with NIDS due to budget constraints, nothing to do with his performance. He was a stellar employee for NIDS, but they were having to cut the budget back, so he lost his job at NIDS. And there's a theory that he wrote this document to try to impress Bigelow about his access to important people so he could get his job back. That's insanity. It's total BS. You know, there's also the idea...
Implying that he actually invented the meeting as a way to kind of fake out Bigelow in some way or another. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, that's another insane theory, you know, and the only other one I'm going to mention right now is, this is the dumbest one I've heard, that the man Davis met wasn't actually Admiral Wilson, but he was sitting in the front seat to avoid a good view of his face so that he could trick Davis. That is nonsense. Because
oh my God! Davis, how did I miss that? Someone said that.
Yeah, and so Davis knew Okey Shannon, and Okey Shannon probably would have been in contact with Wilson, right. And Davis could have verified with Okey Shannon that Wilson had been there. So it's just total nonsense. You know, and we don't even know from the document if they were in the front seat or they were in the back seat. We don't know. But that whole theory that, you know, this was an imposter, you know, pretending to be Admiral Wilson is just complete nonsense. Now,
I'm gonna throw something in here. I'm not sure if I mentioned this ever to you or even to the public, but there's one source that I spoke to about this. Remember, there was a question because the notes are so detailed on Davis's part. One wondered if he actually had either covertly or openly recorded it with a recording device of some sort. And I actually asked around about this possibility, and I actually was told that Davis did not use a recorder. So in other words, it was just an additional confirmation from someone close to all this that, oh yes, Davis was there. Davis obviously interviewed Wilson, and no, he did not use a recorder. He was probably taking notes during the conversation. Obviously, he had to be doing that. But I was actually told explicitly that he did not use a recorder. So just additional confirmation that the meeting did take place. And I cannot say who told me this. I'm sorry, but I just can't do it.
You know, and I appreciate that you have shared that. And I understand that you cannot reveal your source because you don't want to burn that source. You want to be able to get information from that source in the future.
I'm afraid I may have inadvertently burned it anyway, just because I've been talking so much about this over the last year or more. He may be a little hesitant to talk with me, but I have not given him up. Absolutely not, and I will not. I will not give him up. So,
well, yeah. I just want to say that before we move on, because the next part is going to be very interesting, and it's some information that most people probably don't realize unless they've been paying ultra close attention to what Eric Davis has stated. The document is real. So we're going to be moving on to some other material now.
Plus, I just want to say this. Just let me jump in. I was shown that document in 2006, which I have stated countless times till I'm blue in the face. And I recently put out some additional evidence to prove my point that I was shown that document in 2006. I pointed at an interview that I did on the Paracast with Gene Steinberg on July 1st, 2007, in which just before one of the breaks, I actually quoted from the document. I did not state that I had seen a document to that effect, but I had talked about Wilson's denial of access, because I was already talking about throughout all of '07. And I used the phrase, I can't remember my exact words. I said, not of this earth, not by human hands, not made by man, which was, of course, a famous quotation from that document. And I used that phrase to describe this technology just before we went to break. So that was my own little coy way of referring to the document without stating that I had read a document. And I just wanted to put that out there. There's no way that that phrase could have just come to anyone out of the blue. This was directly from that document. And that was the single phrase that I remembered reading, a year later when I gave this interview in 2007. So I just wanted to mention that.
And that's a really good really good interview you gave the Paracast. So, and it's available online. Anybody can find that. So I urge people to listen to it. I just want to say, before we move on to the next section, which I hope we can get through concisely, I just want to say that this document is real, it's legitimate, and it's extremely important. It's not only evidence that these programs exist, but it provides a breadcrumb trail that can help us figure out who actually has these programs, who is managing them, which corporations have the hardware, perhaps even have some of the bodies. And just, I'm just upset that there are individuals that want to incessantly attack this document. I don't know their motivations. I don't understand why they want to attack literally one of the best pieces of evidence we have of the UFO cover-up. But it's really, in my opinion, a disgrace, because if we want disclosure, if we truly feel that the public in the world has a right to know if extraterrestrials are visiting our planet and that literally they're crashing every now and then, or maybe even having landings, maybe even giving us vehicles, then we should support this document. We should try to investigate it, try to get more information, more confirmation of this document. I'm not going to say anything more about that at the moment.
I agree.
But to move on, if you read the various interviews, the transcripts of the interviews, or listen to the interviews that Eric Davis gave before the Wilson document leaked, he gives some really, interesting information. Not only does he talk about, he says it point blank that Roswell happened. There were crashes before Roswell. There was a long series of crashes after Roswell, and landings, he mentions too. But if you piece together his various statements, he actually reveals something very remarkable, a major leak about probably another highlight of his life, probably even more significant than his meeting with Admiral Wilson, because he reveals, if you piece together the information, that he was actually partially read in, maybe informally read in, but it sounds like he was in a skiff when this happened, a secure information facility.
Yes, a sensitive compartmented information facility.
Yep. And he was read into a UFO reverse engineering program by a friend of his that was a vice president of Lockheed Martin. And he actually states Lockheed Martin on Coast to Coast AM, so he identifies that company. And this is really, really significant, because if he was read into a program like that, he has critical information that he can give, for example, to key Senate and congressional chairmen, and Pentagon investigators, and the Inspector General. And also, I think one term used for these congressmen and senators that have a right to be read into these special access programs is the Gang of Eight. That might not be exactly precise anymore, but that's one term I've heard in the past. He could give this information because depending to what extent he was read in, if he signed an NDA, if he signed documentation, or depending what they told him, he could have project names, he could have code names, he could have the names of the individuals that briefed him, and that could be used to locate these special access programs. It might be hard to convince these corporations to actually give the hardware back and to give the alien bodies back to the military after all this time, but it really, really needs to be done. And if he really did meet with this individual that was a former vice president of Lockheed Martin and got read in. That just boggles my mind because it's a linear series of events, because it means he worked for NIDS, which was UFO related. That led to his meeting with Admiral Wilson. Then he was read in to this program. And, now we know that, he works for Aerospace Corporation. But before we get into Aerospace Corporation, I just want to read a couple of these quotes from him, from interviews Eric Davis gave before the Admiral Wilson document leaked. For example, this is a quote. I'm only going to read a small portion of it from Coast to Coast AM with George Knapp. Quote, this is Eric Davis. I also know that a retired vice president of Lockheed Martin himself, he and his family had a UFO encounter on the coast of California, and the craft they saw was a bit of a modified version of the Tic Tac, in that it came to almost a point on one end and it had an unusual light pattern. And this guy had came up through Lockheed Martin working for Ben Rich at Skunk Works, and he told me that he knows all the advanced secretive aircraft and UAVs that are developed by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and all of the American ally nations. And he goes on and on. So basically he admits that he knows this retired vice president of Lockheed Martin.
And I assume that retired vice president presumably said to Davis, I know all the stuff that's being developed, and this thing I saw is none of those objects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Later on in this quote, he said, quote, he said that this thing he and his family saw looked nothing like it, talking about other aircraft from other countries. So you're correct on that point. And here's another quote, and I want to put these together at the end, what they mean. Here's another quote from Coast to Coast AM with George Knapp.
And this is Davis
he said,
going on again?
This is Davis.
Right.
Yeah, this is Davis again. But we have crash retrievals, and they've been analyzed, and unfortunately our laboratory diagnostic technologies and our materials sciences and the understanding of physics that we had were not advanced enough to be able to make heads or tails of what it is, what they had their hands on. The customer, being a certain government agency, decided to just pull the plug on funding, so that was the end of it. And you really have to piece together these different quotes from different programs before we comment too much. Mm-hmm. I want to give a couple of these quotes because you really have to piece them together. This is what I'm about to read now is a quote from Eric Davis on Erica Luke's program, which is available on YouTube. She did a fantastic interview with him. This is Eric Davis. They can deny it. They can stop it in their tracks because they have religious prejudices against UFOs, and they simply, one 3-star Air Force general told somebody I know at a major legacy aerospace corporation once on this particular topic, and it has nothing to do with BASS or the ATIP program. This is a historical program dating back to the 80s, and he basically told this vice president, patriotic Americans don't want to have anything to do with demonic technology or Satan because that's going to lead to their downfall. Patriotic Americans want to stay away from the devil. So that's one quote where he mentions a major legacy aerospace corporation, and he states that it's a historical program going back to the 80s.
And with the fact that there are many people within the defense community, evidently, who with a very strong Christian background are interpreting the UFO phenomenon as demonic. That's certainly the impression that one gets from that.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. Because in other portions of that interview, they discuss the Collins elite and how he mentions that there are small cells, maybe just a few people, 1, 2, 3 people in certain positions in the Pentagon and in different agencies that are very fundamentalist Christians.
Yes.
And they have a bias against anything UFO related because they view it as demonic, and they have shut down these programs. And he actually mentions, I believe it was in this interview, that one of the reasons it's hidden so deeply and buried is to keep these programs away from these fundamentalist Christians, who believe it's all satanic.
Right. My very good friend Nick Redfern, one of the stellar researchers of our generation, has written a book exactly on the Collins elite. It's worth reading. But thanks for bringing that up.
And here's some quotes and one of these is a little bit long, but I'm going to try to go through it fast. This is from Eric Davis on Open Minds with Alejandro Rojas.
Yes, that's a really good interview that Davis did with Alejandro. So I'm glad you're referencing it here.
And this is basically telling the story of how he was bred into the program, although he is not flat out stating in this interview that he was read into a UFO program. You can read between the lines just a little, and the truth pops out. It's obvious. So he states, quote, "And they want to bring the topic up on an informal basis with you, sometimes not even on an informal basis, and they may want to bring the topic up outside the realm of the security apparatus, but within a skiff. In other words, there's going to be no passing of security clearances to establish that I am going to be allowed to read in on the crash approval program, but they'll bring me into a skiff and want to talk informally in the skiff about it and say, well, this is what we can tell you, but there's things that we can't tell you. And we can tell you those things if you can get to the next level security and authorization to get the need to know, and then we can do business with you. But before we get to that point, here's what we can tell you without having to cross that red line of need to know and the proper clearances." So that's kind of talking about how the story of how he was read in, at least informally. So that tells me he may or may not, at that time, when he met with this vice president of Lockheed, he may not have actually been completely brought into the program.
It's a fascinating statement by him, because it gives us a sense of how the dance occurs. That is the classified information dance. And people who have access to some information are talking to other individuals who have their own clearances. And then the question is, well, what do you have clearances for? What am I allowed to tell you? And so here's Davis really talking about how that process actually works in practice. I thought that was quite fascinating.
Oh, yeah. And the story gets even better.
Because you don't hear that very often. You don't hear that very often.
Oh, no,
the
you
description
don't.
Of that, no.
And the information he's given us is extremely valuable. So to go on, here's another quote, which is really important. Quote, "So you work this stuff out over a number of years, you build networks, and you find the right people. And you don't do it by knocking on doors. You do it just through the happenstance of having a contract with somebody or a subcontract, and you're interfacing with them. And then, lo and behold, you find out they're the vice president or the president of one of the legacy aerospace corporations, and they happen to be a PhD of a STEM discipline, all on their own accord. And it just so happens that they were a guy that worked on the crash retrieval program. Oh, lo and behold. And then they find out that you're working on the UFO subject for a DoD program. And they'll say, oh, that's wonderful. You're officially a government contractor or subcontractor, and you're working with another aerospace company. Okay, well, you're working on UFOs. Well, guess what? We did it too. And we don't do it now, but we did it in the past, and here's what we can tell you off the record, and here's what we can't. So this all connects to the previous interviews. And the only other little quote I'm going to read right here is he mentions, "I do know the program was terminated in 1989 for lack of progress in reverse engineering." So basically, if you put this story together, if you put these quotes together, it basically explains how he had a friend that he met through his career, from his networking, that was in the aerospace industry. He was the former vice president of Lockheed Martin, and this guy had previously worked on a reverse engineering program working on UFOs, but he currently didn't. And he took him into a skiff. He took Eric Davis into a skiff and informally, to some extent, read him into the program. So this is another source of information of Eric Davis. And some people like to talk bad about Puthoff and Davis and the whole NIDS group, and they try to say, oh, they all like to feel important. They all like to feel that they're superior to the rest of the UFO community. They love this mystique about themselves. Well, you know what? These people have worked damned hard for years and years for the information they've collected. And to a certain extent, compared to most UFO researchers, and they're much more than UFO researchers. These are scientists. Kit Green's a medical doctor. Eric Davis is, in my opinion, a brilliant physicist. These are not UFO researchers. They are sort of superior to the UFO community in their own way. They're very good, decent, humble people, but to be honest, they are superior to us. I know Eric Davis has an intellect that towers beyond mine, that towers beyond most people in the UFO community. And some people just don't like to think that. They're not humble enough to recognize that in this world, there are certain people that have an intelligence higher than themselves. And I just think it's really important that we recognize just how much this group knows. Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, Lou Elizondo, they all have a lot of information, and that is why I believe they're so important to the disclosure process. But to go to the next step, I'm very curious if him being read into that program, if it in any way helped him get a job at the Aerospace Corporation where he currently works. And that just begs the question, could he be potentially working on a reverse engineering program at Aerospace Corporation? Because it seems like if you have had all these experiences, you've had it verified that UFOs exist. You've been theorizing about warp drives all your life, and you know for a fact that there are aerospace corporations, Lockheed, probably Northrop Grumman, TRW, others, that have the actual craft that you would, you do anything to work on. It seems like you would try to pursue a career path that would get you access to these vehicles. And so I can't help but wonder if he might have an official job at Aerospace Corporation, and then he might be working, unofficially on perhaps a reverse engineering project. And I think there's a possibility, there's a tiny chance we might have an idea of what that program may have been named at one point in the past. Because in the Eric W. Davis documents, EWD document, it mentions a Mary Elizabeth Elliott as a woman that had some kind of issue, an unknown issue with TRW Corporation, which is an aerospace corporation, and she had to obtain the lawyer Jeffrey W. Griffith.
Yes.
And no one publicly has been able online to figure out who Mary Elizabeth Elliott was. But Admiral Wilson, in response to what Eric W. Davis had to say, claims that she sounds like the real deal, and he went on to say that she probably won't tell the full story until she's on her deathbed. So it sounds like they believed her.
Yes, that's at the very end of those notes. That's right. And
so
you and I have talked off the record, offline, I suppose, quite a bit about Mary Elizabeth Elliott and Jeffrey Griffith. So this has been something that you and I have discussed. I don't know if you want to get into that here, if that was on your agenda, or if you wanted to move on to anything else. I'm game to go wherever you want to roll on this.
Well, I'm trying to get to a tentative hypothesis here about what might be going on when it comes to Eric Davis at Aerospace Corporation.
There's an interesting thing. I tied this in the other night on Fade to Black with Jimmy Church. I actually talked about Mr. Griffith, and I understand he's not happy about, he doesn't want anyone contacting him. He's still around. He's an attorney. He's obviously a highly accomplished man. He's had a very impressive career. But, I stated, this is something, again, you and I have talked about privately, but I think it is a near certainty that he is the author of a series of very interesting articles that appeared in UFO magazine in the late 1990s under the pseudonym of Sedge Masters.
Well, actually, the pseudonym for the author was Greg Halifax.
Oh, Greg Halifax. And
the
character was Sedge Masters.
The character
My goodness,
in the stories was Sedge Masters.
That's right. Thank you for that. Because I misspoke on Fade to Black. And that's right. Greg Halifax was his pseudonym, and he created the character Sedge Masters. Thank you for that correction. But in any case, it was certainly Griffith virtual certainty that he's the author of those 3 articles, and those are quite interesting. They're kind of an inside, fictionalized sense of what the UFO cover-up would be, and he talks about an organization called Zodiac. That's essentially a kind of MJ-12 type of organization. And what I thought was interesting there is that at the end of the alien autopsy email thread, which was 2001, you have Hal Puthoff asking about the Sedge Masters article. In fact, I think that's why I screwed up the pseudonym, because Puthoff made the same mistake. He's like, I think Sedge Masters was the pseudonymous author. But no, it was Greg Halifax. But Puthoff was asking about this, and he wanted to ask whether Kit Green or anyone else, do you have any information about this? What's the story with this? So they didn't know about this in '01, but I will bet anything that after that and throughout '02, I think that they must have learned a great deal, because in the EWD notes, in the Davis notes, it's obvious that they were all kind of up to speed on it at that point. You know what I mean?
Yes, because in the alien autopsy email chain document, Hal Puthoff asked a question about the article series, the series of stories in UFO Magazine,
which were very new at the time.
They
were brand new at the time.
And he asked questions. He asked a question about Zodiac in that magazine, and he basically implied that it was like a thinly veiled, fictionalized account of probably something similar to it that really happened. And he asked Kit Green about it. And what's so interesting is Kit Green gave a response to a second question, but it's actually in the document. It's so funny. It says snip, because what Kit Green apparently had to say about it, I'm assuming, was so sensitive that it could not be posted. At least
it wasn't. The printed version wasn't even given to Mitchell.
The printed version. Yeah, yes, the printed.
Right.
And so it just said snip. So that's very, very interesting. And
yes, indeed.
If you look up Zodiac, what's so neat about Zodiac is a Project Zodiac or Zodiac was mentioned in a couple of the Majestic documents that were received by Timothy Cooper and are now available on the Majestics documents website, I believe ran by Ryan S. Wood. And so there's a couple of those documents that mention Zodiac and other programs like Jehovah and a couple others. What's also important is that during your online virtual UFO conference, when asked, Lou Elizondo admitted he was aware of Zodiac, but he couldn't discuss it. He basically refused to comment on it.
That's right.
And what's interesting is if you look up TRW and the history of TRW, basically Hughes Aircraft Company, who, if you do a biography search on Jeffrey Griffith, he was a lawyer for Hughes Aircraft Company, and apparently he was a lawyer for another aerospace company that's not listed on his biography. Hughes Aircraft Company turned into TRW, and then TRW had a division called the Space Technology Laboratories. And the Space Technology Laboratories there was a dispute about it because it had government connections, and they thought it was kind of unfair that TRW might, have like exclusive access to stuff or whatever, or unfair competitive advantage. Anyway, and the solution was Aerospace Corporation was formed, and Aerospace Corporation then hired many of the STL, Space Technology Laboratories, employees. So they absorbed a lot of those employees. Mm-hmm. And so these three companies are all related. So putting this together and thinking about it and pondering it for days and days, sometimes all night long, I'm kind of curious if the program that Eric W. Davis, if he is working on a reverse engineering program, we do not know. We don't know for an absolute fact that Aerospace Corporation has one. I want to make that clear. But it just seems possible to me, this is just a wild hypothesis here, no proof here, that Eric Davis could be working on a modern version of the program that Mary Elizabeth Elliott, if that was what the notes are about, if she discovered something UFO related, like a UFO program, if she discovered Zodiac, for example, maybe Eric W. Davis is now working for a modern version of that might be going by a different name.
Sure.
And if that's the case, it would basically be like the next huge highlight of his career, because it would create this amazing story. And I'll be blunt, if this is the case and he's working on something related to reverse engineering now, I mean, his life could be written up and be a best-selling biography. It would be just an amazing read, and I actually hope that happens sometimes. I actually hope Puthoff has a biography written of him, and I hope Eric W. Davis does too, because both of them have lived amazing lives.
Yes, indeed. I firmly agree with you. Davis, is so, well, he and Puthoff are both so brilliant and so very dedicated to delving into this subject, and they have learned a great deal. So look, I don't know how much more time we're going to have. We're closing in on 2 hours.
I only have a couple things I want to say, and then I'll be done. I just want to say that I think it would be really cool if Eric W. Davis wrote Puthoff's biography, and then Hal Puthoff wrote Eric Davis's biography, because they know each other so well. They would be the most highly qualified to write the biography of the other.
They probably could do that, indeed. Yes.
And I just want to plug a little article that I wrote up.
Right. I wanted to get to this.
And I will admit that, some of the things I say are basically my own little hypothesis and may not actually be the case. I'm just trying to put together the puzzle pieces to the absolute best of my ability, because I'm so fascinated with this subject and I really want the truth to come out. I've been fascinated with this subject all my life, since I was 7 years old, and I'm just ready for this atrocity that's the UFO cover-up that has resulted in basically a couple lost generations where scientific progress basically went nowhere. Our understanding of the universe went nowhere. The reality of, extraterrestrial life visiting Earth and the amazing potential of engineering the vacuum just didn't go anywhere because of the UFO cover-up. But I've written an article that expands on some of the thinking that I have expressed with you tonight. It's called The Insider, the Outsider, and the Benevolent Collaborator, The Adventures of Scientist Eric W. Davis. And I just want to say that I really believe that people need to look at his entire career. They need to look at his career objectively, study the information available, and when you do, everything he has said makes sense. The Eric W. Davis document that leaked out from Edgar Mitchell's estate makes sense. The fact that he met up with this vice president of Lockheed Martin who read him in to a UFO program, at least informally, makes sense. And then the progression to aerospace company makes sense. You have to look at the whole narrative of his life. And when you do, it slaps you in the face and you're like, wow, this guy has lived a true adventure. So that's basically what I wanted to speak with you about tonight. Unless you have any questions for me.
Well, what I just want to say about that, and people need to understand, all the information you have in that, it's kind of like mini biography and analysis. It's all from public sources. It's all readily available out on the web. It's not like you broke into any kind of secret bastion of information. Everything there was well out there in the public. And you simply did something that no one else had done, is you took the time to sift through the evidence that is available to put together, I think, a very coherent thesis and series of hypotheses. And this is not an expose. It's not a critique even against Davis. I think it's you clearly have a lot of admiration for the man. But I think it's overdue that I think the world really understands the significance of this scientist, Eric Davis. It's very, very important. And I think you've done an admirable job in putting that together.
You see, I think Eric W. Davis is a brilliant scientist. Him and Puthoff are both truly, national treasures. It's exactly like Lou Elizondo has to say. they've contributed a lot. They've tried to be as open as they possibly could be without risking their security clearances. I mean, Eric Davis had a spree of interviews he did giving out great information. We've quoted, the quotes we gave are just a few quotes from these interviews. There's a lot more meat in them. But what I want to say is I believe Eric Davis, Lou Elizondo, and others are trying to basically bring disclosure from the inside out. They're trying to work within the system to try to somehow get congressional hearings, to get this new UAP office established. The problem is I don't believe that's going to work. I believe these programs embedded within these private corporations have so much inertia, so much secrecy, because if this technology gets out, if the reality gets out that you can manipulate gravity, you can manipulate inertia, that you can extract energy from the vacuum to power these vehicles, it works against the interest of the private corporations, because they're instantly going to have 100 competitors when other countries reproduce their own versions of the technology.
That's right.
And it works against them. So I just don't believe this inside-out method. It's either I don't believe it's going to work, or if it does work, it's going to drag out so long that these corporations will have destroyed all of the evidence going back to Roswell. They will incinerate the bodies. The extraterrestrial bodies will be incinerated. They will shred any remaining paper documents. They will electronically wipe any electronic databases. They will hide the hardware even deeper and make it so that, we may find out there's, vehicles in their skies. We may get some really good videos. We might get high resolution videos one day of a saucer with an alien waving out the window, holding up a sign saying, "Hello, humans." Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the whole history of this, going back to Roswell, explaining how this atrocity transpired, will be erased. And the history being erased would be almost as bad as disclosure never happening. So we really have to expose the full history of what has transpired, because there have been people that have been persecuted due to their beliefs in this subject. There have been people that have been driven to suicide, like Dr. McDonald, the famous UFO investigator and scientist.
Mm-hmm.
This subject drove him to suicide because of the suppression that has taken place. So I'm just saying that I just wish people like Eric Davis and Lou Elizondo and Putoff and others would recognize that it's time for them to take the gloves off. It's time for them to stand up and just share publicly what they know, revealing everything they possibly can, and to force disclosure on their timetable, not the timetable of the special access programs that they will drag it out for another 30 years. We need to force it now, because the public has a right to know. 80 years, almost 80 years, one entire human lifespan is far, far, far too long. There's zero justification for it, and it needs to end now. And I just humbly beg these individuals, Davis, Putoff, Lou Elizondo, to be the hero, be the patriot, and share what you know. People have died in other countries and made huge sacrifices for nothing. Afghanistan has fell apart. All the sacrifices of all their soldiers, just as an example here, a comparison, was for nothing in Afghanistan. But I know that there's risk in coming forward. There's risk in breaking clearances and, revealing information that could make you lose your clearance. There's all kinds of risk involved. But there's people that have given their lives for nothing in Afghanistan. But they would be doing a service for all humanity, exposing the greatest atrocity in the history of man, and it would be worth it. I know it's a lot to ask, because these people have families, they have careers, they have friends, they have people, they don't want to upset, they want to keep their relationships going, but disclosure has to come first, because it impacts every last one of us, and it's going to impact the future of humanity. We have so many challenges right now humanity is facing, with energy, with the environment, with climate, with all kinds of factors. And the technology that would come from these vehicles, and even the assistance that we could get from these visitors themselves, could help us survive this period in the evolution of our species. So I just think, I just urge them to share what they know, but regardless of what they decide, I really think we should appreciate what they've contributed to this field. We should respect them for everything they have contributed, because these are people that are good guys. These are heroes. These are people that really are on our side, and they want disclosure, even if they may be going about it their own way. So that's basically what I have to say.
Well, I'm actually very grateful that you made that impassioned statement, and I agree with you. I think it was very well said. So
Okay.
how about, I'm sorry, what? I was ready to wrap us up, but go on.
Yeah, I was going to say it's been fantastic speaking with you tonight, and I appreciate this opportunity.
The pleasure and honor is mine, and I have a feeling that people listening to this are very, very glad that you have been able to get on here and talk with me about this, because, people should know that you and I, we talk privately quite a bit, and you keep a fairly low public profile, although a lot of folks in the research community know who you are, and you've talked with quite a few folks. But you keep your identity private, and I certainly respect that. But I'm very glad that people are getting the opportunity to hear your analysis on the Davis notes. I mean, we've used a lot of different terms: the Wilson document, the Davis notes, the EWD notes. These are Davis's notes from his meeting with Wilson, and from the beginning, you've had a lot of insight about those notes. Our marathon interview that we did a couple of years ago was just massive. But this is a nice update, I think. And then I'm very glad you got to talk, as you did just now, about Dr. Davis. I think he realizes, anytime a famous person like that hears that they're the subject of an interview by a few other people, like, they have to wonder, all right, do I have to worry about this or not? And I hope that, I'm sure word will get to him about this, and I hope he realizes that you and I are both coming from a place of high regard for his contributions and a lot of respect for what he's done. And that also goes for Hal Puthoff, someone that I have talked to for quite some time. I have a very high regard for Hal Puthoff and Kit Green and all of these people. I'm not saying everyone here is perfect. I'm not saying that everyone's strategy here for the things that they have done over the years is something that I would have thought is what I would have done, but I'm not in their position either. And they have to follow the path that they feel is best. But I'm going to encourage people to check out your paper, your analysis of Davis. I'll have that linked below. And that'll be on my site at Richard Dolan Members, and anywhere else that you want to put it. You can post it wherever you want, Mr. X, but I'll have it at my site, and that'll be readily available for anyone who wants it. So with that, I guess I will thank the listeners for being here. I am Richard Dolan. This has been a special edition of the Richard Dolan Show. I'm here with an anonymous individual known only to the world as Mr. X, and I've really enjoyed having you on here, sir.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you for listening. I'm Richard Dolan. This is the Richard Dolan Show. I'll catch you next time. Meanwhile, let's all keep fighting the good fight. Later.